7:11 in the morning. Hold on to that number, because everything in this story bends around it. At 7:11 in the morning, on the last Sunday in June, a 12-year-old boy who had not spoken a single word out loud in 5 years rolled a bicycle with a bent back rim across the gravel of a truck stop lot outside Belmont, Tennessee, and put a folded piece of notebook paper into the hand of a man he had never seen before in his life. 40 minutes later, 400 engines started at the same time, and the sound of it came up out of that valley like weather moving in off the ridge. The pavilion at the Ransom Creek Fairground, which was supposed to be a black hole in the ground by lunchtime with 300 children's names attached to it, is still standing today. You can drive out there and put your hand on the posts. 35 hours before that boy touched that pedal, 3 grown men held his notebook flat on the hood of a car in a gas station lot and set it on fire while he tried to pull it out with his bare hand. And 11 adults stood at the pumps and watched it happen, and not one of them moved. That notebook cost $1.10 at Fenn's Drug on Main Street. Remember that number too, because it is going to come back. There was an old man inside that gas station buying coffee when it happened. 68 years old, gray all the way to the roots, thick through the shoulders in a way you would probably call soft if you stood behind him in a checkout line, wearing a green work shirt with his first name stitched over the pocket in white thread. What those 3 men did not know was who they had just lit a fire in front of. A long time ago, men with reputations a whole lot uglier than theirs used to lower their voices when Ellis Vane's name came up in a room, and Cade Rennick, 29 years old, had never once in his life been taught the difference between a quiet man and a harmless one. Nobody in that lot on Friday evening had the first idea what was coming. 400 riders, 9 miles, 40 minutes. That is what is in front of us. Stay with me all the way to the end, because the end of this one is not the part you think it is. It started 35 hours before that bicycle ever left the porch. Friday evening, 6:40 in the evening, the 26th of June, and the heat coming up off the asphalt at the Gas and Go on Route 9 was the kind that arrives after the sun has already started letting go. The kind that sits in the blacktop and gives it back to you all night long. Cicadas going in the tree line, a pump ticking, the smell of diesel and hot tar, and somebody's air conditioner condenser running rough behind the building. Micah Teague came down the shoulder of Route 9 on a bicycle that had been 3 different bicycles before it was his, standing on the pedals the way a kid does when the seat is too low and he has stopped caring. 12 years old, 4'9", 78 pounds with his shoes on. A t-shirt 2 sizes too big, with a feed company logo cracked and peeling across the chest, and sneakers with the toe going out on the right one. He had a plastic milk crate zip-tied to the rack over his back wheel, and in that crate, every single day of his life was a spiral notebook. That notebook was his mouth. Micah Teague had not said a word out loud since he was 7 years old. Not one. Not to a doctor, not to a teacher, not to his grandmother, not in his sleep, not when he was hurt, and not when he was happy. Everything he had to say to another human being for 5 years, he had written down with the stub of a pencil he kept behind his ear. And when a notebook filled up, he rode down to Fenn's Drug and bought another one for $1.10 out of money he earned sweeping a shop floor. And he kept the full ones in a shoebox under his bed. He had just filled one. That was why he was at the Gas and Go that evening. He had ridden down to Fenn's before it closed at 6, bought the new one, put it in the back pocket of his jeans, still wrapped in the cellophane, and stopped for a bag of ice because his grandmother's freezer had quit again. The full notebook, the finished one, 190 pages of 2 years of his life, was still in the crate on the back of the bike. He had not moved it into the shoebox yet. He never got the chance. The white flatbed came into the lot from the east side and parked crooked across 2 spaces the way certain men park when they want you to notice them parking. and it had Ridgeline Salvage and Hauling stenciled down the side, and one yellow driver's door on a white truck, because they had replaced it out of a wreck and never painted it. 3 men got out. Marvin Tully, 31, who had a lighter in his hand more or less permanently, the way some men have a phone. Keegan Shell, 24. Ronnie Witt, 26. They had been drinking since 4. They had been paid that afternoon in cash out of a coffee can, which is how Ridgeline paid everybody. Keegan walked past the bike rack and put his boot into Micah's back wheel on the way by. Not hard, just enough. And the bicycle went over sideways onto the concrete with that flat clatter a bicycle makes. And the milk crate came off the rack, and the notebook came out of the crate and slid about 4 feet. That was the first thing. It was not really about the bike. That is important to understand. It was about the fact that there were 11 other people in that lot, and every one of them turned their head, and every one of them turned it right back. Keegan Shell had done that particular test about 100 times in that county, and it had never once come back on him. Micah came out of the store with the bag of ice in both arms and stopped. He set the ice down on the concrete. He did not make a sound, because he does not make sounds. But you could see his whole body change shape when he saw where the notebook had landed. He went for it. Ronnie Witt got there first. Ronnie picked it up and held it over his head, out of reach, and did the thing that grown men do to children when there is an audience, holding it just high enough that the kid has to jump, and Micah jumped twice, and then stopped, because he was 12 and not stupid, and he already understood exactly what was happening. Keegan took it off him and started flipping the pages, and then he started reading it out loud. That is the part that turns a shove into something else. He read a boy's private handwriting out loud, in a gas station parking lot, in a voice pitched up high and stupid. And what he read was not a secret, and not a confession. It was just the ordinary business of a kid's life. "Grandma, the freezer is out again. Can I use the wire brush? I finished the tire rack." And then he found a line near the back, and he read that one twice, because he thought it was the funniest thing he had ever seen. "My hands smell like rubber, and I like it." 11 people at those pumps. A woman at pump 3 put the nozzle back on the hook so slowly it was almost a decision. A man in a church shirt got into his car and shut the door and looked straight ahead at his own steering wheel. Somebody inside the store said something to somebody else, and then did not say anything more. Micah stood there, with his arms down at his sides, and his ears going red, and his jaw locked. And everything he could have said to make it stop was in the book that man was holding. That is not a metaphor. It was literally in there. Then Marvin Tully took it. Tully was the one with the lighter. He laid the notebook flat on the hood of the car parked next to the flatbed. Somebody else's car. A maroon sedan belonging to a woman named Ruth Ann Pell, who was inside buying scratch tickets. And he put his left hand down on the cover to hold it, and he thumbed the lighter. And he set the corner of 190 pages on fire. Paper burns fast when it is loose and dry and full of air. The pages curled up from the corner and went from white to brown to nothing in a few seconds, and the ash came off the hood in flakes and went up on the heat, gray and light, turning over in the air the way ash does. And Micah Teague watched about 2 years of his own voice come apart in front of him. And then he did the thing that a 12-year-old does. He reached into it. He got both hands into the fire on that car hood and grabbed for the middle of the book where the pages were not gone yet. And he got hold of it. And he held on for about a second and a half. A second and a half is a very long time to hold burning paper. He came away with maybe 40 pages and a right palm that was already blistering across the heel and the base of 3 fingers. And he backed up 2 steps and sat down hard on the concrete with the pages against his chest. And he still did not make a sound. That is what those men would remember later, when they were sitting in rooms explaining themselves. The kid did not scream. The kid never made a single sound. Inside the store, at the coffee station by the window, an old man had been standing with a 20-ounce styrofoam cup under the spout of the regular pot. 2 sugars, no cream, same as every Friday. He had been there long enough to see the bike go over. He had watched the whole thing through the glass, through the racks of windshield wiper fluid and the cardboard cutout of a woman holding a beer, and he had not moved. He waited, not because he was afraid, because he was hoping. He was hoping one of those 11 people out there was going to be the one. He gave it the whole way. He gave it until the fire. Then Ellis Vane set the coffee cup down on the counter without putting a lid on it, and the girl behind the register, Bethany Cruz, 22 years old, who had known him her entire life because he had put tires on her mother's Buick every winter since she was in grade school, said later that she looked up because of the sound of the cup going down. It was not loud. It was just very final. She said she had never in her life seen a man walk that slow towards something. The bell over the door went. Ellis Vane came out into that heat in a green work shirt with Ellis stitched over the pocket, sleeves rolled twice, and he came around the end of the pumps the way he did everything, unhurried, like a man who had all the time in the world and had already decided how he was going to spend it. Marvin Tully saw him coming and laughed. He stopped laughing about 4 seconds later. Vane went to the boy first. That is a detail worth sitting with, because there were 3 men standing right there, and one of them still had a lighter in his hand. And Ellis Vane walked past all 3 of them like they were traffic cones, and crouched down in front of a kid sitting on the concrete, and turned that right hand over and looked at the palm of it in the last of the daylight. Then he took the burned pages out of the boy's other hand, and folded them once and put them in his own shirt pocket. Then he stood up. And then, and only then, did he turn around. Now, this is where everybody wants me to skip straight to the part where a 68-year-old man in a work shirt takes 3 men apart in a gas station parking lot. I know that. I want to skip to it too. But we're going to slow all the way down for a while. Because if I give you that right now, it is going to be a fight in a parking lot, and that is all it is going to be. And it is not that. You need to know exactly who that man in the green shirt used to be before you watch what he does with the next 9 seconds. And more than that, you need to know exactly who that boy on the concrete was and how he got there. Because in about 35 hours, that boy is going to get on a bicycle in the dark and ride 9 miles uphill with a hand that looks like that. And if you do not understand what that notebook was, you will not understand a single thing about why he did it. So, Ransom Creek, Tennessee, population 1,140 as of the last count, down from 1,900 when the mill was running. 1 traffic light on Main, a drugstore, a hardware, a Methodist church, a Baptist church across the street from it because of an argument in 1911 that nobody alive can explain anymore. A diner called Dolly's that opens at 5, and out on the east end, where Main turns into Route 9, a low cinder block building with 2 bay doors and a hand-painted sign that says, Ransom Creek Feed and Tire. Ellis Vane bought that building in 1999. He opened the doors at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Monday in October, and he had opened them at 6 o'clock in the morning every day the place was open for 27 years running by the time this story starts. Not 6:05, not 10 till. 6. There were men in that county who set their watches by the sound of that first bay door going up. And one winter, when he had pneumonia, he came down and unlocked it at 6, sat in a chair by the space heater for 11 hours coughing, and locked it at 5. The place smelled like 3 things, and I want you to have all 3. Rubber, first, that hot black smell that comes off a stack of new tires in the summer and gets into your clothes. Coffee, second, because there was a pot going from 6 until noon, and he never washed the carafe properly, and anybody who came in got offered a cup whether they wanted one or not. And third, faint underneath both of those, the sweetness of the cocoa tin he kept on the shelf above the parts washer, which had been up there for 2 years by then, and which no adult had ever once been offered. Micah Teague turned up at that shop on a Tuesday afternoon in April, 2 years and 2 months before the fire in the parking lot. He was 10. He came in through the open bay door because it was raining, and he had nowhere else to be. And he stood inside the door, dripping on the concrete, and did not say anything, which at that point Vane did not know was permanent. Vane was breaking a tire off a rim. He looked at the kid. He said, "You can stand there, or you can hold that valve stem." And Micah walked over and held the valve stem. That is the whole conversation. He came back the next day. Then he came back every day. Vane never asked him a single question about where he lived or who was looking for him or why he did not talk, which is the exact opposite of what every adult in Micah's life had done for 3 years, and it is the entire reason the boy came back. Everybody else in that town had been trying to get words out of him, like trying to get a stripped bolt out of an engine block, with more and more force. And Ellis Vane just handed him a broom. Here is what the boy got, over 2 years, and none of it was ever discussed. He got a milk crate turned upside down to stand on so he could reach the counter. He got a chore list written out on the back of a tire invoice in block capitals, because Vane figured out inside a week that the kid would do anything you wrote down and freeze up if you asked him out loud. He got a key to the back door in the 2nd month, a real one, cut at the hardware for $4, and Vane never mentioned it again after he handed it over. He got paid $20 every Friday in an envelope, and 4 mornings a week, without ever once being asked, he got a cocoa in a chipped green mug, made too hot, set down on the corner of the counter about 10 minutes after he came through the door, at which point Vane would go do something else so the kid could drink it without being watched. And every time a notebook filled up, Ellis Vane would find $1.10 on the counter next to the register in the morning, and he would put it in the drawer, and he would never say a word about it, because the boy paid for his own notebooks, and both of them understood that this mattered. $1.10. That is the entire operating cost of that boy having a voice. The reason Micah did not talk, I will give it to you plainly, and then we will move on, because he would not want it lingered over. When he was 7 years old, the single wide he lived in with his mother out on Pine Hollow Road caught fire at 2 in the morning off a space heater and an extension cord, and a neighbor named Delbert Hoyt went through the back window and came out with Micah, and went back in for Dana Teague and did not come out with her. Micah screamed for 11 minutes on that lawn, according to the man who held him, screamed until there was nothing left in him, and then he stopped, and he never started again. Doctors have a word for it, and the word does not help anybody. His grandmother Odessa took him in, 71 years old, working nights sorting birds at the poultry plant in Belmont for $14 an hour. And she loved that child absolutely and could not fix him. And after about 3 years, she stopped trying to and just let him be, which was probably the kindest thing anybody did for him until the day he walked into a tire shop out of the rain. Now the town. Ransom Creek in that decade was a town in the process of quietly folding its hands. The mill went in 2009. The bank branch went in 2014. The pharmacy hung on because Wendell Fenn was 79 and stubborn. And into a town like that, when it gets soft enough, something always comes. Not from outside, usually. That is the part people get wrong. It comes from inside, from somebody who grew up there and watched it go down and decided the only thing left worth owning was the part where everybody else is scared of you. Ridgeline Salvage and Hauling opened in a leased yard off the county road in the spring of 2023. 6 acres, a crusher, 3 trucks, a portable office trailer with a window unit hanging out the side. On paper, it bought scrap and hauled construction debris, and it did, in fact, do both of those things. Underneath the paper, it ran the simplest business in the world, and the business was this: $200 a month, cash, and nothing happens to you. That was it. That was the whole model. $200 a month from the diner, $200 from the hardware, $200 from the auto parts, $200 from Fenn's drug, $200 from the little Mexican grocery the Salazars opened in the old video store, and $100 from the 2 barbers, because a barber cannot really lose inventory. Nobody called it anything. It was billed as a hauling contract, and there was even an invoice, and on the invoice it said monthly site service. And Wendell Fenn, at 79 years old, kept every one of those invoices in a shoebox in his back room for 3 years because some part of him knew. And nobody fought it. Fighting it got a window put in. It got your dumpster tipped in your own lot at 3 in the morning. It got a nail strip laid across your delivery entrance so your supplier blew 2 tires and stopped coming. Nothing that ever rose to the level of anything. Nothing you could take to a jury. Just the steady, grinding demonstration that the world could be made unpleasant for you at a rate of about $200 a month. Every single business on that street paid it. 22 of 23. The one that did not was the tire shop on the East End. Cade Rennick, 29 years old that summer. He was not a big man, 5'9", maybe 160, wiry, with a jaw he kept clenched so much it had built up muscle on the sides of his face. He wore his hair short and his boots expensive, and his truck was the only clean vehicle in the county. He had one visible marking that anybody could describe, and every witness described the same one. On the inside of his right wrist, running up toward the elbow about 4 inches, there was a burn scar, old, puckered, shiny in the middle, and rough at the edges, the kind that comes from something molten rather than something on fire. He touched it constantly, ran his thumb up it when he was thinking. He never explained it, and if you asked, he would smile at you. And that was the other thing everybody described, the smile. Cade Rennick smiled a great deal, and it never once made it as far as his eyes. It arrived on the mouth, stayed exactly as long as it was needed, and left without ever having involved the rest of his face. Men who have to be liked smile with their whole head. Men who have decided that being liked is a waste of time smile like Cade Rennick did. Now I'm going to tell you where he came from, and I want to be careful here, because understanding a man is not the same as excusing him, and I have no intention of excusing him. But you are going to need this later. Cade's father was Odell Rennick, and Odell ran a salvage yard on that same county road for 26 years, the actual family business. And Odell was, by every account, a decent enough man and a terrible businessman. He carried people. He let a man take a transmission and pay when he could, and half of them never could. In 2007, the note came due, and the bank came down, and there was a courthouse auction on a Tuesday morning in the hallway outside the Register of Deeds office in Belmont. 6 acres, a building, 26 years of a man's working life. Cade Rennick was 11 years old, and he stood in that hallway next to his father, and his father stood there holding his hat in both hands, actually holding his hat. And a man from 2 counties over bought the whole thing for $11,000. $11,000. And when it was over, the man who bought it walked past Odell Rennick and clapped him on the shoulder and said, "No hard feelings." And Odell Rennick said, "No, sir, no hard feelings," and shook his hand. That is the wound. An 11-year-old boy watched his father absorb a humiliation and say thank you for it. Odell never answered it. Not that day, not ever. He took a job driving a rock truck, and he did that until his back went, and then he sat in a chair. And his son grew up around a man who had been folded in half in public and had chosen to stay folded. And somewhere in there, Cade Rennick made the decision that runs his entire life, which is that he was never going to be a man that anything got taken from, and that the fastest way to guarantee that is to make sure everybody is a little bit afraid of you all the time. He built Ridgeline on fear instead of respect, because fear was faster. Respect takes 26 years, and you can still lose it in a hallway on a Tuesday. The first visit to the Feed and Tire was in April, about 10 weeks before the parking lot. It was a Wednesday, 9:15 in the morning. Cade came in with Marvin Tully and stood inside the door for a second the way he always did, letting the room notice him. And there were 4 people in that shop: Ellis Vane behind the counter, a farmer named Cletus Pruitt waiting on a tractor tire, Bethany Cruz's mother, Dinah, dropping off a wheel, and Micah Teague, 12 years old, up on the milk crate at the end of the counter, working on a chore list with a pencil. Cade did the pitch.
He was good at it, is the thing. He was polite, and he was warm, and he talked about the road, and about how bad things were getting out here, and about how somebody has to look after the businesses in this town, since the county sure will not. He said Ridgeline was doing a site service package for $200 a month, and that most of Main Street was already on it, and that it included hauling, and it included, he said, and he let the pause sit there, and he smiled, peace of mind. Ellis Vane had been counting out change for Cletus Pruitt while he talked, and he did not stop counting. He put the change in Pruitt's hand, said, "There you go, Cleet," and then he looked up at Cade Rennick for the first time. Most people telling Cade Rennick no said it with their voice going up at the end, or with their hands moving, or with a whole speech about how times were tight. Ellis Vane said one word. No. That was it. He did not say, "I cannot afford it." He did not say, "Let me think about it." He did not say, "I do not need it," which is an argument and invites a counter-argument. He said, "No." And then he stood there and waited, and the shop went completely still, and the only thing anybody could hear was the compressor out in the bay cycling on, running for about 11 seconds, and cycling off. Nobody said anything into that. Cletus Pruitt looked at the floor. Dinah Cruz looked at her wheel. Cade Rennick's smile flickered like a candle, catching a draft it had not seen coming. Then it came right back, and he said, "All right then," and he tapped the counter twice with 2 fingers, and he said, "You let me know if things change out here," and he walked out. Tully looked back once on the way through the door. That was the entire first visit, under 2 minutes. After they left, Micah Teague came around the counter and stood next to Ellis Vane and wrote something in the notebook and turned it around. It said, "You should just pay it." And under that, because he was 12 and he was scared and he had already had one house burned down, he wrote, "Please." Vane read it. He took the pencil off the boy's ear, which was a thing he did, and he wrote back underneath it in block capitals 3 words: "It is fine." And then he gave the pencil back and went and put a pot of coffee on. And the boy believed him, mostly. But Ellis Vane had not told that boy the truth. And I want to be very clear about what the lie was. It was not fine. He had made his decision the moment Cade Rennick turned around and walked out that door. He only hoped it would never come to it. It came to it. All right, now I have to take you a long way back, because there was a photograph on the wall of that shop, and we have walked past it about 6 times already. It hung to the left of the register, low, at about the height of a man's chest, in a plain black frame with a crack running across the bottom corner of the glass that had been there since before it went on that wall. It was a picture of 17 men standing in front of a line of motorcycles on a gravel lot somewhere with mountains behind them, taken in 1979, and it was so faded that the sky in it had gone the color of weak tea. Customers looked at it. Everybody looks at a photograph. Nobody ever asked about it, because there is a way a thing can hang on a wall that tells you not to ask, and that photograph hung exactly that way. Third from the left, in the back row, there was a young man about 6'1", with dark hair down past his collar, and his arms folded, and no expression on his face at all. If you knew what you were looking at, you would have seen that every other man in that photograph was standing at some kind of angle to him. Ellis Vane was born in 1957 in Sevier County. His father worked concrete and died at 51.
Ellis went into the Army at 18, came out at 22, and did what a lot of men who came out at 22 in 1979 did, which is he found the only group of people who did not require him to explain himself. And he stayed. The club was called the Iron Covenant. It is gone now. It was not a big thing in the way people mean when they say big thing, and it was never in any newspaper you have read. But for about 20 years across 4 states, it was a real thing, with real weight, and Ellis Vane was inside it from 1979 until 1998. For 11 of those years, he held an office. I'm not going to dress it up. He was the man they sent when talking had stopped working. That was the job, and he was extraordinarily good at it. And being extraordinarily good at that particular job is not something a man puts on a wall. What it meant in practice was that for over a decade, in rooms full of people who were not afraid of very much, Ellis Vane walking in through the door lowered the temperature by about 10 degrees. And there were men, hard men, men with reputations built on hospital visits, who would find a reason to be somewhere else. He married a woman named Ruth Pardee in 1978. Everybody called her Bertie, and not one living person can tell you why anymore, including her sister. She was 5'1". She ran the books for a lumber yard. She could not carry a tune, and she was the only human being on this earth who ever told Ellis Vane to sit down, and had it work. They had one son, Danny, born in 1979. Danny Vane was not going to be his father, and everybody in that world understood it by the time he was 14. He was gentle in a way that skips generations. He liked engines the way some kids like animals. He never had one fight in his entire life that anybody knows about. And at 19 years old, he was working at a garage on the state road outside Maryville, doing brakes and oil changes, and staying late because he was rebuilding a 1971 shovelhead in the back bay on his own time. In August of 1998, there was a fire at that garage at 2:20 in the morning. Danny was in it. He had been sleeping on a cot in the back because he had been working on that bike until 1 and did not want to drive home. The fire started in a parts room where somebody had put a rag down. It was ruled accidental in a report that ran to 4 pages.
4 pages for a 19-year-old, filed by a fire marshal who had 11 other things on his desk that week. It was not accidental. Ellis Vane knew that by the following Thursday. I'm not going to give you the whole shape of it because it belongs to a world that is gone and to men who are mostly dead. But it involved a dispute over a building, an insurance policy, and a man named Roy Del Ketchum, who was 34 years old and who had lit that parts room to collect on a garage that he did not know had anybody sleeping in it. Ellis Vane found Roy Del Ketchum 11 days after the funeral. He found him in a doorway of a motel outside Athens, Georgia, at 4 in the morning. And he had him. Had him completely. Ketchum was on his knees on that concrete walkway with his hands up, and there was nobody within 400 yards, and it was going to take about 9 seconds, and the whole rest of Ellis Vane's life was going to be a different life. And the reason it did not happen is not because a police car came around the corner, and it is not because somebody talked him down. It is because Bertie Vane had said something to him in a kitchen 4 days earlier, and she had not begged, and she had not cried. She had just put a plate down in front of him and said, "If you go do that, then the fire took 2 of you, and I am only burying 1. And then she went to bed. He let Roy Del Ketchum live. He walked back to his bike, and he sat on it in that parking lot until the sun came up. Roy Del Ketchum was arrested 19 months later on an unrelated matter and died in custody in 2004 of a heart attack at 40. And Ellis Vane found out about it from a phone call and said thank you and hung up and never mentioned it again to anybody. He left the Iron Covenant in November of 1998. There was no ceremony and there was no trouble about it. He was 39 years old. He had a wife and a grave and no son. And he was done. And in the spring of 1999, in a cemetery on a hill outside Sevierville, standing at the foot of a stone that had been in the ground 8 months, Ellis Vane made a promise out loud. He said it slowly, 1 word at a time, with a stop between each one, the way a man does when he needs the words to hold up under weight later on. He said, "I will not pick it up again." And then he stood there for a while. And then he said the rest of it, because he was honest enough with himself to know that a promise with no door in it is a promise a man will eventually kick down. He said, "Unless there is a child behind me who cannot get out." That is the condition. Write it down next to the $10. Ruth Vane died in 2011 of pancreatic cancer, 9 weeks from the diagnosis to the end. And after that, Ellis Vane lived alone in a house on Cutter Hollow Road and opened a tire shop at 6 o'clock in the morning for 15 years. In the back bay of that shop, under a canvas tarp on a stand, was a 1971 shovel head that had never been finished. He had gone and got it out of the insurance salvage in 1998 and hauled it home on a trailer and put it on that stand and never touched it again. The tools on the wall above it hung in painted outlines so that nothing could ever be in the wrong place, and those outlines had been painted by a 19-year-old. Micah Teague dusted that tarp once a week for 2 years and never once lifted it, because he had been told not to exactly 1 time, quietly, and once was enough. And under the counter, screwed to the underside of the shelf where the receipt spike was, there was a steel ammunition box, army green, 19 inches, a hinged lid with a rubber gasket and 2 clasps. Ellis Vane put his hand on that box every single morning at 6 o'clock for 27 years. The way you check a thing without thinking about it. The way a man pats his back pocket for his wallet. And in 27 years, he never once opened it. Micah saw inside it exactly one time. It was the first winter, a February morning, and he was sweeping under the counter, and the handle of the broom caught the corner of the box and knocked the near clasp loose, and the lid came up about 3 inches on its own weight. Inside, there was black leather, folded, and on the leather there was stitching, and the boy looked at it for maybe 4 seconds before Ellis Vane came around the end of the counter and put his hand flat on the lid and pushed it shut and reseated the clasp with his thumb. He did not say anything. He did not get angry. He went and made a cocoa. But that night, at his grandmother's kitchen table, Micah Teague drew what he had seen. He drew it from memory, in pencil, in a notebook that cost $1.10. And he got it close enough. Hold that. That drawing is going to save 300 lives in about 16 months. And neither of them had any idea. Now, back to that parking lot. 6:43 on a Friday evening in June, and a 68-year-old man in a green work shirt has just stood up from a crouch and turned around. And there are 3 men in front of him, and the closest one is Marvin Tully, with a lighter still in his hand, and the ash of a boy's notebook still moving in the air between them. Ellis Vane stood a half-second longer than he needed to. Half a second is nothing, and it is also everything. And it was the same half-second he had given men in doorways 30 years earlier, and it meant the same thing then that it meant now. It meant, go on, take the door. He said one thing, quiet enough that Bethany Cruz could not hear it through the glass, and the 2 men at Pump 6 could barely make it out. He said, "Boys, I'm going to forget your faces if you are in that truck before I finish talking." And Marvin Tully laughed and said, "What are you going to do about it, Pop?" 9 seconds, maybe 10. That is how long it took. And I'm going to give it to you straight, and I'm not going to dress any of it up, because there is nothing entertaining in it, and there was not supposed to be. Vane took Tully's right wrist with his left hand and turned it over, and he stepped in, not back, in, which is the part nobody expects, and Tully's arm went past where an arm goes, and Tully went face first onto the hood of Ruth Ann Pell's maroon sedan, and then off it onto the asphalt, and his shoulder came out of the socket on the way down. One motion. It looked like a man closing a heavy gate. Ronnie Witt came in from the left because that is what a man does, and Vane did not swing at him. He put a forearm across Witt's chest and walked him backward 4 steps into the side of the flatbed, and the whole truck rocked on its springs, and Witt sat down in the gravel with no air in him and stayed there. Keegan Shell, 24, ran. He got about 11 feet, and then he stopped, because Ellis Vane had not moved after Witt hit the truck, and Keegan turned around and looked at him, and the old man was just standing there with his arms down, breathing normally, waiting. The compressor on the ice machine outside the store kicked on. That was the only sound in that lot for the next several seconds. That, and Marvin Tully making a noise on the ground about his shoulder. 11 adults at those pumps, and not one of them said a word. And half of them had their phones out by then, which is its own kind of comment on where we all live now. Ellis Vane did not go finish anything. He turned his back on all 3 of them, which is not a thing you do, and which is a statement so complete that Keegan Shell told the courtroom about it 8 months later. He walked back over to the concrete, and he picked the boy up under the arm and stood him on his feet. And then he did the 4 things that everybody in that lot remembered. He walked into the store, past Bethany Cruz, and got a bag of ice out of the freezer, and did not pay for it. And he broke it on the edge of the sidewalk, and wrapped a handful in his own handkerchief, and put it in Micah's right hand, and closed the boy's fingers over it. Then he picked the bicycle up off the concrete, and put the chain back on the ring, and turned the crank twice to seat it. And he zip-tied the milk crate back onto the rack with a spare tie out of his shirt pocket, because a man like that has a spare tie in his shirt pocket. Then he went and got the push broom from inside the store, and he swept up the ash and the burned paper and the corner of the cover that had not gone. And he did it himself, slowly, all the way to the edge of the lot, while 3 men who worked for Cade Rennick got themselves up off the ground. Nobody helped him sweep. Nobody ever does. And the 4th thing, Keegan Shell was the only one of the 3 still upright and functional, and he was standing by the driver's door of that flatbed with his hand on the handle. And Ellis Vane stopped sweeping and looked at him across about 15 feet of asphalt and delivered the message. He said, "You tell Cade Rennick I do not care what he does about the shop." And then he said the second part. He said, "But the boy is not part of this, and if any of you come near him again, I'm going to come out to that yard and have a conversation with every one of you about it." Keegan Shell said, "I will tell him." And then he said, and this is in the record, he said, "Mister, I did not know that was your kid." And Ellis Vane said, "He is not," and went back to sweeping. They drove Marvin Tully to the emergency room in Belmont and told the intake nurse he fell off a trailer. They put his shoulder back in at 9:20 that night. Ellis Vane drove Micah Teague home in his truck with the bicycle in the bed, and they stopped at the 24-hour pharmacy in Belmont, and he bought burn gel and non-stick pads and a roll of tape for $18.41. And he sat in the parking lot under the dome light and dressed a 12-year-old's hand with more care than most men give anything. And he did it without saying one single word, because he understood by then that silence was not something wrong with that boy. It was the room the boy lived in. And if you wanted to be with him, you went in there and you sat down. At the end, he wrote something on the back of the pharmacy receipt with a carpenter's pencil out of the door pocket, and he handed it over. It said, "We will get you a new book Monday." And underneath, "My fault. I should have come out sooner." Micah took the pencil and wrote under that, in a hand that was shaky because of the tape on his fingers, "No." And Ellis Vane looked at that word for a while in the dome light, and then folded the receipt and put it in his shirt pocket with the burned pages, and drove the boy home. He believed that was the end of it. He genuinely did. He drove back out Cutter Hollow Road with the windows down, and he thought about Birdie for a while the way he did on Fridays. And he went to bed at 10, and he got up at 4:50, and he opened the bay door at 6 on Saturday morning like he had for 27 years. He was wrong. The worst part of that weekend had not introduced itself yet. Here is what happened out at the Ridgeline yard on Saturday morning, while Ellis Vane was mounting a set of tires on a stock trailer and drinking coffee out of a carafe he never washed. Cade Rennick got there at 8, and by 8:15 he had the whole story. And the whole story made him laugh, which is a thing several people found strange later. He was not angry at first. He thought it was funny. 3 of his people had gotten themselves stacked up in a gas station lot by a tire man. He said, out loud in front of 6 men, "Tell me again how old he is?" And that is when Harlan Boyce spoke up. Harlan Boyce was 61 years old, and he ran the crusher, and he had been at Ridgeline since the week it opened because he needed the money, and there was nothing else. And he was 2 full decades older than every other man out in that yard. He had been sitting on an upturned bucket the whole time with his ball cap in his hands. And he said, "What did he look like?" Keegan Shell said, "I do not know. He is old, he is gray, big through here." Harlan Boyce said, "No. What did he look like?" And Keegan said, "He had a green shirt on with a name on it." And Harlan said, "What name?" And Keegan Shell said, "Ellis." What Harlan Boyce did next, 6 men described the same way, and one of them used the phrase, "the color of old paper." He did not say anything for a second. He turned his ball cap over in his hands one time, and then he set it on his knee, and then he stood up very slowly, the way a man his age stands up. And he walked 11 feet to the fender of a truck and sat back down on that instead. And then he said, "Is the shop out on the East End? Feed and tire?" Cade Rennick said, "Harlan, what?"
And Harlan Boyce, 61 years old, who had ridden the hard road himself in the 80s, before he came home and put it down, told 6 men in a salvage yard a story none of them had ever heard. He did not tell it well. He kept stopping. He said the name Iron Covenant and got blank faces, because to a 24-year-old in 2026, that is a name off a jacket in an antique mall. He said, "There was a thing outside Chattanooga in '88, and there was a room with 14 men in it, and one of them came in, and it stopped. It just stopped. It never went off at all. And he did not lay a hand on anybody. He just came in." Ronnie Witt said, "So he was a tough guy 30 years ago. Great." And Harlan Boyce looked at him and said the thing that changed the temperature in that yard. He said, "You are not listening. I am not telling you he could fight. Half the men I ever knew could fight. I am telling you that when that man decided something was going to happen, it happened. And it did not stop happening because somebody got hurt, or somebody got arrested, or somebody apologized. It stopped when he said it stopped." And then Cade Rennick asked the question, and this is the one that mattered. He said, "All right. Is there anybody left? Are there people that still come when he calls?" And Harlan Boyce said, "I do not know." That was the answer. Not yes, not no. I do not know. And I want you to sit with how much worse that is than either one. A yes is a number you can plan against. A no is a green light. I do not know is a room with the lights off. Harlan Boyce said, "The club is gone. It has been gone 27 years. But those men did not evaporate. They got old, and they got jobs, and they are out there. And I could not tell you if there is 4 of them or 400. And neither can you. And neither can he, probably." Cade Rennick stopped laughing about it right around then. And here is where a shakedown turned into something else. And I want to be precise about the mechanism, because it is not rage. Rage would be easier to forgive. It was arithmetic. Cade Rennick's entire operation was built on 23 businesses believing that nothing could be done about him. Not on being liked, not on being useful. On that one single belief. And on Friday evening, in front of 11 witnesses with phones, a 68-year-old man in a work shirt had disproved it in 9 seconds in a gas station parking lot on the busiest road in that county. By Saturday noon, that story was in Dolly's Diner. By Saturday evening, it was in both churches. 22 businesses were going to hear, by Monday, that the tire man said no, and nothing happened to him. So Cade Rennick did not need to hurt Ellis Vane. He needed something much colder than that. He needed the entire county to watch what happens to a man who says no. And he needed it to be so large and so final that nobody would ever run the experiment again. And he had a way to do it, because he had been working on something else for 4 months already. And now the two problems solved each other. The fairground, 41 acres on the north side of Ransom Creek, owned by a nonprofit board of 7 volunteers with an average age of 66, running on a budget of about $9,000 a year, and a tractor from 1980. There was a covered pavilion on it, 120 feet by 60, timber frame with a metal roof, poured slab built in 1974 by volunteers, and behind it, a utility shed, a 500-gallon fuel tank for the tractor and the mowers, and a gravel lot. The county had been trying to get that land rezoned for aggregate extraction for 2 years because there is a limestone seam under it, and the man pushing it hardest was a county commissioner named Lyle Barrow, who wore a gray suit to meetings where every other man wore a shirt, and who had a way of putting both hands flat on the table before he spoke that he had clearly practiced. The board had voted it down twice, 11-0 across 2 meetings, if you count both times. And every single year, on the last Sunday in June, that pavilion was the reason it stayed a fairground, because that was the day of the Red Bud Run. Now let me give you the Red Bud Run properly, because it is the thing this whole story is standing on. It started in 2004. A man named Carl Osley, who everybody called Tiny because he was 340 pounds, had a granddaughter who spent 5 months in the pediatric burn unit at the hospital in Knoxville after a grease fire. And she came home, and Tiny Osley decided he was going to do something about the fact that families sleep in chairs for 5 months. So he called everybody he had ever ridden with, and 41 bikes showed up the first year, and they raised $1,100. And Tiny Osley died the following March at 9 minutes before 8 in the morning. And the men who came back the next June decided that the run would roll out every year at the exact minute Tiny's heart stopped. And it has ever since. 7:51 in the morning, 22 years running. Not 7:50, not 8, 7:51. And if you are not staged, you are not on it. And by that summer, it was not 41 bikes anymore. Riders came from 6 states, independents, 5 different clubs, church groups, a fire department out of Kentucky that brought a truck, a whole crowd of men in their 60s who had put their bikes away in 1985 to raise families and pulled them back out at 55. 411 registered that year. They staged at the old Belmont truck stop on Route 9, starting at 6 in the morning, rolled at 7:51, ran 22 miles of 2-lane, and pulled into the Ransom Creek Fairground at about 8:30, where 7 volunteers from a nonprofit board and about 40 women from 2 churches ran a pancake breakfast under that pavilion for every child in that county who wanted one, plus every family from the burn unit that could travel. 300 kids, give or take, every year. Free. And a bucket by the door that had put $90,000 into that hospital across 22 years. So here is what Cade Rennick worked out on Saturday afternoon, sitting in a portable office trailer with a window unit dripping onto the gravel. If the pavilion burns during the Red Bud Run, and it burns in a way that looks like it came from those bikers, then the run is finished, permanently. And the fairground board is finished, because they had let their coverage lapse to $8,000 of liability in 2022 to save $400 a year. And the county condemns the structure, and the rezoning goes through in the fall with 3 votes he already had,
and Lyle Barrow gets his aggregate seam, and Ridgeline gets the hauling contract for it, which was worth about $400,000 a year. And on top of all that, every business on Main Street watches the Tire Man's people get blamed for setting a fire at a children's charity, and nobody ever says no to Cade Rennick again. 2 problems. 1 fire. They put it together on Saturday, out loud, in a metal trailer, in front of 9 men. 14 involved altogether. 4 trucks. 11 gallons in 2 cans, diesel cut with gasoline, which burns slower and hotter and looks less deliberate. 2 road flares. A pair of bolt cutters for the utility shed padlock, a high-vis vest, and a magnetic county maintenance placard for a truck door, because you can walk anywhere in this country if you are wearing a vest. And 1 more item, which is the item that turns 14 men into 14 defendants. A rag. A dark red shop rag with a club patch sewn onto it, bought off an auction site for $31, that a man named Dale Prather was supposed to leave 20 feet from the point of origin, where a fire investigator would find it in the first hour. And the time. Marvin Tully, sitting there with his arm in a sling from Friday, said, "Do it at 6 in the morning before anybody is out there." And Cade Rennick said no. He said, if it burns empty at 6, they cancel the run and it is an insurance story. And then he said the sentence that 11 men repeated under oath, and that I am not going to soften. He said, it has to go while they are under it. 9:20 in the morning. Pancakes at 9. 300 children under a timber frame with a metal roof, and 11 gallons of fuel poured along the north skirt on the upwind side. Not to kill anybody. I want to be fair, even here, because being unfair to him lets him off. Cade Rennick did not sit in that trailer planning to kill children. In his head it was going to be smoke and panic and people running and a building lost and a story on the news. And he had never in his entire life had to actually watch what a fire does, because the only fire that ever touched him left 4 inches of scar on his wrist and taught him precisely nothing. That is what happens to a man who has only ever seen the small version of a thing. He thinks the big version is the same shape. Harlan Boyce got up and walked out of that trailer. He did not say anything. He went and sat in his truck for 40 minutes, and then he came back in, because he was 61, and he had a wife on oxygen, and there is no other work in that county. And that is a real thing that happens to real men, and I am not going to pretend it is simple. He came back in. He hated himself for it. 8 months later, he stood up in a courtroom and said so. Now, Micah Teague. They had thrown his bicycle in the back of the flatbed on Friday. Not the whole bike, they had not bothered with that. But when Ellis Vane picked it up off the concrete, the front wheel had been taken off it and put in the truck bed, because Ronnie Witt thought that was funny, and Vane had a spare 20-inch wheel at the shop and put that on Saturday morning, and it was slightly out of true, and the rim rubbed the brake pad on every rotation with a soft tick. That is why the wheel was bent. That is why, 9 miles later, 400 men would hear a bicycle coming across a gravel lot before they saw it. But the front wheel that came off that bike had a hub Ellis Vane had rebuilt for him in the winter, and Micah had watched him do it over 3 evenings, and to that boy, it was not a wheel. So on Saturday evening, around 7, Micah Teague told his grandmother he was going out on his bike, which is to say, he rode it on a scrap and left it on the table, and he rode 4 miles out the county road to the Ridgeline yard to get his wheel back. 12 years old, a bandaged right hand. 4 miles out a county road at dusk to a salvage yard belonging to men who had set his notebook on fire the day before. I have thought about that a great deal, And I have decided it is not bravery, and it is not stupidity. It is what happens when a person has very few things. He did not go in the gate. He was not that kind of foolish. He laid the bike down in the ditch grass 100 yards short and came up the outside of the fence line through the sumac, on the west side, where the crusher and 2 stacked rows of car bodies made a wall about 11 feet high, and he got into the gap between a shipping container and a stack of flattened cars, and from in there he could see the back of the office trailer and the lit-up window and the door standing open with the screen shut. And his front wheel was leaned against the wall of the trailer 11 feet from that door, which meant he could not have it. So he sat down in the gravel to wait for them to leave. And while he was waiting, the door of that trailer stood open with the screen shut and a window unit running, and 9 men talked. And a 12-year-old boy who does not make any noise at all sat 11 feet from the wheel he had come for, and heard the entire thing. He heard the time, 9:20. He heard the number 11 gallons, and he heard the words north side and upwind. He heard somebody say the shed padlock, and he heard somebody say the flare. He heard Dale Prather asked twice whether he had the rag, and heard him say it is in the glove box. And he heard Marvin Tully say, "What about the tire man?" And he heard Cade Rennick say something that Micah Teague could not make sense of at the time, and that he wrote down on Sunday morning almost word for word anyway. Rennick said, "After this he can pay or he can close, and either way that whole street is going to watch him do it." Micah Teague sat in that gravel gap for a long time after that, long enough that his legs went numb. There was a radio playing inside the trailer, and the compressor on the crusher's air line cycled twice, and out past the fence a whippoorwill went for about 11 minutes straight, the way they do in June. That is what a 12-year-old listens to, while he understood what he had just heard. Now, think about what he had and what he did not have. He could not call 911. Do you understand that? He physically could not. He could dial it, and a voice would say, "What is your emergency?" And then there would be silence on that line, and a dispatcher in a room 40 minutes away would say, "Hello? Hello? Is anybody there?" and log it as an open line, and send a car in 90 minutes if there was a car. He could not call Ellis Vane, whose landline out on Cutter Hollow Road was the only phone he had, and who did not carry a cell because there is no service on that road anyway. He could not call his grandmother, who was on the line at the poultry plant until 6 in the morning, and whose phone had been shut off on the 11th for $61 past due. He had a bicycle, a pencil, and a brand new notebook that had never been opened, still in the cellophane, in the back pocket of his jeans, that he had bought for $1.10, about 45 minutes before 3 men burned the old one. He got out of that yard the way he came in. He left his front wheel. He rode 4 miles back into town in full dark with no light on that bicycle, which is its own kind of terrifying on a county road. And he went straight to the sheriff's substation on Main Street, which is 1 room with a desk in the old bank building. And it was dark, because the substation in Ransom Creek is open Tuesday and Thursday, 9 to 2. And it was Saturday night. There was a laminated sign in the window with a number on it, so he opened the new notebook, and on the very first page, sitting on the concrete step of a locked building under a security light, with moths going, Micah Teague wrote out everything he had heard. It took him 9 minutes. He tore it out and he folded it, and he pushed it under the door of that substation, all the way under with his fingertips. And he sat there for a while. And then he went home. That note was found at 9:40 on Sunday morning by Sheriff Warren Tibbs. It was 2 feet inside the door under a stack of mail, and by 9:40 on Sunday morning, it did not matter anymore. And Warren Tibbs, who was 59 years old and had been with that county 34 years, sat down on the floor of that substation with that piece of paper in his hand and could not get up for about a minute and a half. It became State's Exhibit 11. He has said publicly, more than once, that it is the worst piece of paper he has ever held. Micah did not sleep. His grandmother came in at 6:40 in the morning, and he was already gone. Sunday. The last Sunday in June. He was on the road at 5:35 in the morning with the sky going gray over the ridge and the fog sitting in the low fields the way it does in June in that country. And he rode straight to the feed and tire because Ellis Vane opened at 6 o'clock in the morning and had for 27 years. And a boy who has almost nothing had that. He had a building that opens at 6. It was dark, both bay doors down. The truck was not in the side lot. And that is the moment, right there, 5:38 in the morning on a Sunday, standing on his pedals in an empty gravel lot in front of a dark building, that everything hung on. Ellis Vane had left Cutter Hollow Road at 5 o'clock that morning and driven out to the Ridgeline Yard on the county road alone, because he had spent all of Saturday thinking about it, and had decided that he was going to go out there and stand in that gravel and finish this thing with Cade Rennick, face to face before Monday, before it got to anybody else, before that boy went back to school in August, before it grew. He got there at 5:20. The gate was chained. He parked on the shoulder outside it, and he sat on the hood of his own truck, and he waited. Because he had all the time in the world, and he did not have the first idea what was in the beds of the 4 trucks that were going to come rolling back into that yard at 20 minutes to 8. So the shop was dark, and Micah Teague sat there on that bike in front of it for maybe 40 seconds, and then he looked at the front window, at the glass, where there were 4 things taped up: a card for a church supper, a poster for the county fair, a sun-bleached notice about a septic ordinance from 2019 that nobody had ever taken down, and a flyer, yellow, 8.5 by 11, printed at the copy shop in Belmont, taped up in that window every year in May, that said, 23rd Annual Redbud Run, and under it, Pediatric Burn Unit, and under that, Staging Belmont Truck Stop from 6 a.m., rolls 7:51 sharp. Micah Teague had swept the floor under that window 100 times. He used his key. That is the part I keep coming back to. He unlocked the back door of that shop with a key that had been cut at the hardware for $4 and handed to him in his 2nd month and never mentioned again. And he went in the dark, and he did not turn on a light, and he went behind the counter, and he got down on his knees, and he unscrewed the 2 wing bolts that held the steel ammunition box to the underside of the shelf, which took him a while with a bandaged hand. And he took the box out with both arms and put it in the school backpack he had brought, because he did not have any other bag. And it weighed about 11 pounds, and it did not fit right, and the lid of the pack would not close over it. Then he went back out and locked the door behind him. Then he sat down on the step, and he opened the notebook again, the 2nd page, and he wrote the note. He wrote it in block capitals because that is how you write for a stranger. And when he was done writing it, at the bottom of the page, in pencil, from memory, from a night at his grandmother's kitchen table 16 months earlier, he drew the patch. 9 miles. Route 9 out of Ransom Creek toward Belmont, and it is not flat. There are 2 long grades on that road, one out of the creek bottom at about 1.5 miles that runs for 6/10, and the hogback at mile 6, which is short and mean. Gravel shoulder most of the way. Fog in the low spots thick enough that a car does not see you until it is on you. Sunday morning traffic is nothing but church people and 2 log trucks and the occasional man going fishing. He had a bandaged right hand, and every time he pulled up on that grip, the tape moved, and the blisters on the heel of his hand opened up, and by mile 4 there was blood in the bar tape, and he did not stop. He had a rear wheel out of true that ticked against the pad on every single rotation, 411 times a mile, if you want to know. Tick, 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 all the way to Belmont. He had 11 pounds of steel in a backpack that would not close, riding up on his shoulder blades, and every time he stood on the pedals, it swung. At mile 2, a dog came off a porch at him, a big rangy thing, and ran alongside him for about 80 yards, and he did not look at it, and it gave up. At mile 5.5, a pickup came around him too close on the fog line, and the wind of it put him into the gravel, and he went down on the shoulder and skinned his left knee and elbow, and got back up and got back on. The chain came off on the hogback, and he got off and put it back on with his fingers, and had to wipe them on his jeans. And the boy who had held the valve stem in the rain when he was 10 put that chain back on the ring in about 11 seconds, because he had watched a man do it 400 times. I want to say one thing about those 9 miles, and then we are going to move on. Nobody was watching. That is the whole thing. There was no crowd, and there was no camera, and there was nobody at the end of it who was going to know if he stopped, because nobody at the end of it even knew he existed. He could have turned around at mile 3 and gone home and gotten in bed, and nobody on this earth would ever have found out. And everything that happened at 9:20 would have happened, and he would have been a 12-year-old who did not know what he could have done. He wrote it anyway. 7:11 in the morning. He came off Route 9 into the truck stop lot at Belmont with his shirt soaked through, and his hand bleeding into the tape and his rim ticking. And he stopped at the edge of the gravel, and he put a foot down, and he looked at what was in front of him. 411 motorcycles, staged in rows across 4 acres of asphalt and gravel, with the sun just up over the tree line, and the whole lot full of that low idle and men talking, and somebody's radio, and the smell of coffee and exhaust. A folding table at the front with 2 women taking registrations and handing out route sheets. A trailer with a grill on it. Men in leather in June, because that is what you wear. Men in cutoffs and men in club colors from 5 different organizations, standing around not looking at each other much. A fire department pumper from Kentucky with a banner on it. A woman with a service dog. 3 men in their 70s sitting on a cooler. Every one of them saw the kid come in. You cannot come into a lot like that on a bicycle at 7 in the morning and not be seen. What they saw was a small kid, soaked, bleeding, with a backpack that would not close and something green and metal sticking out of it. And the first thought of about half those men was, that kid is running from something.
The road captain that year was a man named Denton Cobb, 57, from Morristown, who everybody called Denny, and he had a clipboard in his hand, because that is what road captains have. He came over, he crouched down, which was the right instinct, and he said, "Hey, son, are you all right? What is going on?" And Micah Teague, who had ridden 9 miles to say something and could not say anything, held out a folded piece of notebook paper. Denny Cobb took it and stood up and unfolded it and read it. And I'm going to give you exactly what was on that page, because it is in the record, and because it deserves to be read the way a 12-year-old wrote it, with the spelling he had. It said, "Men from Ridgeline are going to burn the pavilion at the fairground at 9:20 this morning, when the kids are under it. 11 gallons diesel and gas, north side.
They cut the padlock on the shed. They have a road flare. They have a red rag with a club patch sewed on it, and they are going to leave it there so it looks like you done it. It is in the glove box of the white flatbed with the yellow door. The man is Cade Rennick. I heard them say it last night. I am not lying. I can't talk. I am sorry. And at the bottom, drawn in pencil, the patch. Denny Cobb read it twice. And you have to understand his position for a second, because Denny Cobb had 411 riders and a police escort scheduled, and a route, and a pancake breakfast. And what he was holding was a piece of a kid's notebook with a story on it that sounded like a movie. And what he said, out loud, mostly to himself, was, "Son, I do not know what to do with this." And then he looked at the drawing at the bottom of the page. And Denny Cobb was 57, which meant he had come up 10 years too late to know what he was looking at. But he had been doing this long enough to know he did not know. So he did the smartest thing anybody did that morning. He walked that piece of paper 11 rows back to a cooler where 3 old men were sitting, and he handed it to the oldest one. Roy Sackett, 72 years old. Everybody had called him Padre since about 1982, and about 4 people alive knew why. He had a white beard down to the second button, and he had ridden every one of the 22 Redbud runs, and he was on that cooler because his hips were finished. He took the paper and got his glasses out of his vest and read it. And Denny Cobb said, "Look at the bottom." And Padre Sackett looked at the bottom. And then he took his glasses off. He said, "Where did this boy get this?" Denny Cobb said, "He just rode in on a bicycle." Padre Sackett got up off that cooler, and 3 men said afterward that they had not seen him get up off anything that fast in 15 years. And he walked over to where Micah Teague was standing next to Denny Cobb's bike, holding his own handlebars. And he got down in front of him with a great deal of difficulty. And he held the paper up and put one finger on the drawing at the bottom of it. And he said quietly, "Son, where did you see this?" And Micah Teague turned around and swung the backpack off his shoulder and knelt down on the asphalt and took out an army green steel ammunition box with both hands. And he put it on the ground, and he opened the 2 clasps, and he lifted the lid. And inside, folded in eighths, was a black leather vest that had not been out of that box in 27 years. And on the back of it was the top rocker and the center patch of an organization that had not existed since 1999. And across the front, over the left side, was a strip of stitching that said what office the man wore. Roy Sackett looked into that box for about 4 seconds. Then he put both hands on his knees and said something under his breath, and then he said, out loud, to a road captain standing over him with a clipboard, he said, "Denny, whose is this?" And Micah Teague took the pencil from behind his ear and wrote on the back of his own note in block capitals and turned it around. "Ellis Vane. He owns the tire shop. He is my friend." Padre Sackett sat down on the asphalt, just sat down, right there in the middle of a truck stop lot in front of 400 people. And he started to laugh, except it was not laughing. It was the sound a man makes when about 40 years arrives all at once. And he put his hand over his mouth, and Denny Cobb said, "Padre, talk to me." And Roy Sackett said, "That is Deacon Vane's kit." Denny Cobb said, "I do not know that name." And Padre Sackett looked up at him from the asphalt and said, "No, you do not. But there is 11 men in this lot right now who do, and I want every one of them over here inside of 2 minutes." It was 7:14 in the morning. They had 37 minutes. Now, here is where a lot of stories go one direction, and this one went another. And the direction it went is the entire reason 400 men are still proud of that morning. Nobody got on a bike and went out to that salvage yard to settle it. That is what everybody expects, and that is what would have gotten every one of them exactly what Cade Rennick needed, which was 400 bikers on the news in a fight on the morning of a children's charity ride. Denny Cobb understood that inside of about 90 seconds, and Roy Sackett understood it before he understood anything else. What they did with those 37 minutes was the least dramatic thing available and the single most effective. And I'm going to walk you through it because the details are the story. 7:16. Denny Cobb got up on the flatbed trailer with the grill on it with a bullhorn out of the registration box and told 411 people to shut their engines off. And they did, in about 11 seconds, in a wave from the front of the lot to the back. And then there was nothing but a rooster somewhere behind the truck stop and the ice machine outside the door, and 400 people standing in a gravel lot at 7 in the morning, listening. He read the note, all of it, exactly as written, including the part where the boy apologized for not being able to talk. 7:18. 3 phone calls went out simultaneously off that trailer. The first was to the Woodard County Sheriff's Dispatch, made by Denny Cobb, who gave his own name, his date of birth, his address, his phone number, and the entire content of that note, and who then said the sentence that a dispatcher in that county has since said she will hear for the rest of her life. He said, "Ma'am, I want you to write down that I am telling you this at 7:18 in the morning." The second call was to the Ransom Creek Volunteer Fire Department from a Kentucky fire captain named Amos Hurd, who had brought that pumper up, chief to chief, which is a different kind of phone call entirely, and got a different kind of answer. And the third was to Wanda Pruitt, who was 74 years old and the chair of the fairground board, and was at that moment already at the pavilion with 11 other women setting up 240 chairs. 7:21. Sheriff Warren Tibbs, who was at home, out of uniform, with a cup of coffee, got a call from his own dispatcher and said, "Say that to me again?" And she did. And Warren Tibbs, 34 years in that county, had a moment in his own kitchen that he has described since. Because he had sat in a private office in the county administration building 14 months earlier with a folder in front of him, and he had put one finger on a page of it and slid it across a desk to Commissioner Lyle Barrow, and he had said, "This outfit is running a protection racket on Main Street, and you are about to hand them a hauling contract. And when this goes wrong, my people are going to be the ones standing in front of it." And he had been told that it was an economic development matter, and that the sheriff's office should focus on the sheriff's office. He had been right for 14 months, and there was not 1 ounce of satisfaction in it. 7:24. Wanda Pruitt walked 40 feet from the pavilion to the utility shed with the phone still at her ear, and she looked at the hasp on that door, and the padlock was hanging in it open, and the shackle was not cut, because they had not gotten there yet. They were coming at 8:40, but there was a hasp with a padlock hanging open that she had personally locked on Thursday, and she said into that phone, "Oh, Lord." And she and 11 churchwomen moved 240 chairs back off that slab in 9 minutes. And then she called the school and got the buses stopped. 7:26. And this is the one. Denny Cobb got back on that bullhorn and told 411 riders exactly what was going to happen. And he was extremely specific, and he repeated it 3 times. He said, "We are rolling at 7:51 because we roll at 7:51. He said, "We are riding the route." He said, "We are going to the fairground, And when we get there, every single bike is going to be shut off and put on the stand in the gravel lot on the county right-of-way, on the road side of that fence, and nobody, and he said nobody twice, is going to set foot on the fairground side until the sheriff gets there. He said, keep your hands where people can see them. He said, if anybody comes at you, you do not put a hand on them. You back up and you get it on video. He said, we are not going to give them one single thing. And then he said the last part, and 400 men have quoted it since. He said, boys, they need us to be what they say we are. So today, we are going to be so boring it is going to break their hearts. 731. 22 men who owned businesses of their own, or who had trailers, split off with Amos Hurd and the pumper and went ahead the short way. Not to do anything. To be standing in the parking lot with the fire department when the first church van full of kids showed up, so that no family would arrive at that fairground and find nothing but confusion. 734. Somebody found a first aid kit, and a woman named Charlotte Beam, 61, a retired ER nurse from Corbin who had ridden every Red Bud run since 2009, sat that boy down on a cooler and unwrapped his right hand, and looked at it, and said out loud, "Who did this?" Nobody answered her, because nobody knew yet. She cleaned it and dressed it properly with what she had, and she did not ask him one single question that required a word. And when she was done, she gave him her own bandana to put over it. 739. Padre Sackett got 11 men around the tailgate of a chase truck. 11 men, all of them between 63 and 76, 4 of whom had ridden with the Iron Covenant, and 7 of whom had known it from the outside. And Roy Sackett laid that note on the tailgate and put his finger on the drawing and said, "That is Deacon's, and this kid says he is out there at that yard right now, by himself." And a man named Curtis Eyre, 69, out of Bristol, said the only thing anybody needed to hear. He said, "Then that is where some of us are going, and we are not going to go there hot, and we are not going to go there to fight anybody. We are going to go there and stand in that road until the law shows up, and we are going to be standing right where he can see us." 746. Denny Cobb crouched down in front of Micah Teague one more time and said, "Son, I need you to stay right here at this table with these ladies. You have done your part. You have done more than your part." And Micah Teague nodded. 7:51 in the morning, on the last Sunday in June, on the minute that Carl Ostley's heart stopped in 2005, 411 engines started at the same time in a gravel lot outside Belmont, Tennessee. And if you have never heard 400 motorcycles start together in a valley at 7 in the morning, I cannot get it across to you in words. Windows moved. The fog came apart. 2 dogs a mile off started up. Charlotte Beam said the ground came up through the soles of her boots. And when that lot cleared and the last row rolled out onto Route 9, there was a folding table with 2 women behind it, and a bicycle with a bent rear wheel leaned against the leg of it. And no boy. He had gotten into the back seat of Denny Cobb's chase truck, which was a crew cab pickup with a trailer on it, driven by a man named Sonny Kurtz, and he had gotten down on the floorboard behind the driver's seat. And Sonny Kurtz did not know he was there until they were 4 miles up the road. And when he found out, he pulled over and got on the radio, and Denny Cobb said a word he does not usually say, and then said, "Keep him in the truck. Do not let him out of that truck. I mean it." The boy had partially obeyed. That is all a person can ask of a 12-year-old. He stayed in the truck. Now, Ridgeline Salvage, 7:40 in the morning.
4 trucks came off the county road and up to that gate, and the chain was already off it, because there was a green Ford parked on the shoulder outside, and a 68-year-old man in a green work shirt was sitting on the hood of it, and the chain had been cut through with a set of bolt cutters that had been sitting in the bed of one of their own trucks in that yard for 2 years. He had cut their chain with their own tool, and then sat down and waited 2 hours and 20 minutes for them to show up. Cade Rennick got out of the second truck. There were 7 men in that yard by 7:45. Marvin Tully with his arm in a sling, Keegan Shell, Ronnie Witt, Dale Prather, 2 brothers named Coy and Bart Lemons, and Harlan Boyce, 61, who got out of the last truck and looked at the man on the hood of the Ford and went and stood by the crusher and did not come any closer for the next 25 minutes. Ellis Vane got off the hood. He did not have anything in his hands. He walked in through his own cut gate about 20 feet and stopped in the gravel, and he said what he had driven out there at 5 in the morning to say. He said, "Cade, whatever you have got with me, I will settle with you right now, today, however you want it. But you are going to leave that boy alone, and you are going to take my street off your list." And Cade Rennick, who did not know that a 12-year-old had been in the gravel gap between a shipping container and a stack of flat cars 12 hours earlier, and who had a job scheduled for 9:20 and 11 gallons of fuel in 2 cans in the bed of a truck sitting 11 feet away, laughed and said, "Mr. Vane, you have got the worst timing of any man alive." Then he looked at his watch, and then he stopped laughing, because he did the arithmetic. This old man had just walked into a yard on the one morning in the year when there could not be a witness anywhere, and had told 7 men that he was there to settle it. And Cade Rennick understood that he was not going to get a better opportunity than the one that had just parked itself on his shoulder, and that if the tire man was in the hospital by 8:30, then the tire man was also the last person on earth who could be somewhere else at 9:20. He did not say, "Go." He did not have to. He took 2 steps back, and he ran his thumb up the scar on the inside of his wrist, and he said, "All right then." 7-to-1. That is the ratio. And it was really 6, because Harlan Boyce never moved off the crusher, and because Marvin Tully had one arm in a sling, which he threw away about 4 seconds in. 6 men in an open gravel yard against a man who was 68 years old in November. The first fight on Friday had been fast, 9 seconds. This one was not fast. This one went on for a little over 4 minutes, and it was not a fight, it was a war. And the only reason it lasted 4 minutes instead of 40 seconds is geometry, and I want to explain the geometry because it is the reason he is alive. There were 2 rows of flattened car bodies stacked 11 feet high, running east to west with a gap between them about 9 feet wide. And Ellis Vane went into that gap backwards in the first 6 seconds. He did not go in there to hide. He went in there because in a 9-foot gap, 6 men can only come at you 2 at a time, and the 2 in front block the 4 behind, and every man who wants a piece of you has to walk down a corridor to get it. 27 years off the road had not taken that out of his head. That is not strength. That is a man who was taught, and who taught others, and who at 68 looked at an open gravel lot and immediately saw the only 9 feet in it that mattered. Coy Lemons came first because he was 26, and he was fast, and he had never once in his life been hit by somebody who knew how. He came in swinging, and Vane put an elbow through his chin, and Coy Lemons went down on his hands and knees in the gravel and stayed down there. And his brother had to pull him back out by his belt to get past him. Ronnie Witt came second with a 2-foot piece of exhaust pipe, and Vane took the pipe on his left forearm, which broke the ulna,
and he has said since that he knew it was broken in the moment it happened, and it did not seem important at the time. And he took the pipe off him and threw it over the stack. Keegan Shell got in behind Whit and got both arms around Vane's waist, and Vane drove him into the edge of a car body, and Keegan Shell's ribs went, and he sat down in the gravel and started throwing up. And then it got long. They stopped coming in one at a time after the first minute. Bart Lemons and Dale Prather went around the east end of the stack and came in from behind, and now the corridor had two ends, and that is when Ellis Vane's morning actually got bad. He backed up until his shoulder blades were against the flat rear panel of a 1990 Buick pressed into a 2-foot slab of steel. And he put his back on it, and he made every single one of them pay full price for the 9 feet in front of him. His body reminded him, joint by joint, in order, that he was not the man he had been at 35. The left forearm was already gone. The right knee, which had a plate in it from 1993, went at about the 2-minute mark, and after that he could not step off it and had to turn on the left every time. His lungs were done at 3 minutes. There is nothing in a tire shop that trains you to fight for 4 minutes, and no man alive at 68 can do it. And by 3.5 minutes, Ellis Vane was slower than every man in that gap, and all 6 of them knew it. But 4 decades had not taken the one thing that had always mattered most about him. And here it is, and it is not a nice thing. It is just true.
In a fight, he did not stop, not when he was hurt, not when he was losing, not when it was over. It never occurred to him. That was the whole basis of that man's old reputation, and every single person who ever feared him feared exactly that, and nothing else. Dale Prather hit him in the back of the head with a 3-foot length of chain at 3 minutes and 50 seconds. For one long, terrible second, the whole yard tilted sideways in front of his eyes. He went down onto his right knee, the bad one, and put his hand flat in the gravel, and there was blood coming down the back of his collar into that green work shirt, and out on the road a truck went by without slowing down, and inside the office trailer a radio was still playing, and Harlan Boyce, 61 years old, standing by the crusher, put both hands over his face. Every man in that gap believed they were about to watch it end. So did Ellis Vane. He did not go down. He got his hand off the gravel, and he got his left foot under him, and he came up off that knee, and Dale Prather, who had a chain in his hand and was standing over a 68-year-old man he had just hit in the head with it, took 3 steps backward and did not come forward again. That is what Harlan Boyce testified to. Not that Vane did anything, that he simply stood back up, and a man with a chain retreated from an unarmed man who could barely stand. And that is the exact moment Cade Rennick pulled the pistol. It came out of the center console of his truck, a 9mm, and it had been in that console for 2 years and had never been out of it. And if you want to know how a man ends up doing 14 years, that is how. Everything up to that second was assault, and it was ugly, and it would have been a felony, and it would have been survivable. What happened next was not. Everything stopped, and I mean everything. 6 men stopped moving. Keegan Shell stopped being sick. The Lemons brothers put their hands out flat like the air had gotten thick. And there was nothing in that yard for about 11 seconds but the compressor on the crusher's air line cycling on, running, and cycling off, and a radio playing behind a screen door in a trailer nobody was in. A gun changes a fight. It does not matter how skilled a man is, how tough, how willing, how many years he spent being the thing other men were afraid of. It takes all of it off the table in about 1/4 of a second.
and puts a completely different question on the table instead. And the different question is whether the man holding it is the kind of man who will. Cade Rennick's hands were shaking, both of them. 6 witnesses said so, and it is in the transcript 4 separate times. 29 years old, standing in his own salvage yard at 7:56 in the morning, with a pistol out in front of him in 2 shaking hands. And he had never in his life crossed this particular line. And he was finding out in real time that he did not know how to walk it back. Because he could not put it away. Every man in that yard had seen it. If he put it away, he was a man who pulled a gun and could not use it. And that is a thing you cannot recover from in a business built entirely on people believing you. He had built the whole thing on fear, and the bill for it had just arrived, and he had to pay it in front of everybody. Ellis Vane straightened up. He was standing on one good leg with a broken forearm and blood down the back of his shirt, and he was breathing like a man who had run up a hill. And he looked at that pistol for a second, and then he looked past it at the man holding it. And he spoke in exactly the same quiet he had used at the counter in April, when he said one word. He said, "Son, your hands are shaking." And then he said, "I want to tell you what happens either way, because I do not think anybody has ever told you." He said, "If you miss, then for the rest of your life you are a man who pulled that out and missed. And every one of these boys standing here saw it, and you will never get one more dollar out of anybody in this county." And he said, "And if you do not miss, then there is a phone in every one of these boys' pockets, and there is a man on that crusher who has known me 40 years, and by dark tonight your name is going to be in rooms you have never heard of." He said, "You're not going to get a trial and a cell and a life, Cade. You're going to get found. And when they find you, you're going to try to explain that it was about $200 a month." And then Ellis Vane said the last thing he said, and it is the sentence Harlan Boyce broke down about on the stand. He said, "Put it down, and I will forget your face." And Cade Rennick did not put it down. Because he could not. Because there were 6 men watching, and because when you have made yourself into the thing everybody is afraid of, the thing gets to make your decisions for you. And he stood there in that gravel with a pistol shaking in his hands, and 11 gallons of diesel in the bed of a truck, and no road left in any direction. And that was the moment the gate opened again. It was 2 minutes past 8. Sonny Kurtz's crew cab came off the county road and into that gravel lot with 11 bikes behind it, and 11 more coming up the road behind those. And out on the county road, faintly, from about a mile and a half off, coming up over the ridge, was the sound of a great many engines that were not in any hurry at all. Curtis Ayer and Padre Sackett and 9 other men in their 60s and 70s got off those bikes and put them on their stands and shut them off, and they did not come through the gate. They stopped at the fence line, on the roadside, exactly where Denny Cobb had said, and they stood there in a line in the gravel with their hands out of their pockets. 2 of them had phones up already. Nobody said one word. 11 old men standing at a fence, looking into a yard. Cade Rennick still had the pistol up. He had turned about 30 degrees, and he had it up in the general direction of the gate now, and Ellis Vane was 11 feet away from him and could not get there on that knee. And the back door of Sonny Kurtz's truck opened. 12 years old, 4'9", 78 pounds, a skinned left elbow, a right hand wrapped in a nurse's bandana, jeans with chain grease on the thigh, shirt still wet through from 9 miles. Sonny Kurtz grabbed for him and missed. Micah Teague walked out into the middle of that gravel yard with an army green steel ammunition box held in both arms. And he walked past Bart Lemons and past Dale Prather with the chain still in his hand. And he stopped about 8 feet from Cade Rennick, and he put the box down on the gravel, and he opened the 2 clasps, and he took out a folded black leather vest, and he stood up, and he held it out in front of him with both hands so that everybody in that yard could see the back of it. It was a bluff, and it was not a bluff, because the boy could not say what it meant. He did not know what it meant. All Micah Teague knew was that a 72-year-old man had sat down on the asphalt at a truck stop when he saw it, and that 11 men had come running when they heard the name, and he had worked out with a 12-year-old's logic that this piece of leather made grown men do things. And behind him, at that fence, standing perfectly still in a line, were 11 old men who did know what it meant, and behind them on the county road, closing, was a sound like the ridge itself coming loose.
And Cade Rennick looked at it, and he did not know what it was either. He was 29 years old, and it was a jacket, but Harlan Boyce, 61, standing by the crusher, said out loud into that silence, in a voice that came apart in the middle of it, he said, "Cade, Cade, put it down, son." And Cade Rennick looked over at the fence, and he counted 11 men, and then he heard what was on the road, and you could watch the math land on his face in real time. Every one of these people has a phone. There are 11 witnesses at that fence who do not work for me. There are 400 more coming up that road. My own crusher man is telling me to stop. And the boy, the one thing he could not have planned for and could not intimidate and could not buy, standing in the open in front of a gun, holding up a piece of leather with both hands. He said, out loud, to nobody, "What is that? What is that?" And Micah Teague, 12 years old, who had not made a sound out loud since he was 7 years old on a lawn on Pine Hollow Road, opened his mouth, and in a voice that came out cracked and small and rusted all the way through, said one word. He said, "No." That is all. One word, the same word Ellis Vane had said across a counter in April, and it landed in that gravel yard exactly the same way. The pistol came down first, slow, like the weight of it had finally won an argument that Cade Rennick's arm had been losing for 2 minutes. It went down to his side and hung there. And Ellis Vane came across those 11 feet on a knee that would not hold him, and he did not knock him down, and he did not take his head off. He reached out and put his hand over the top of that pistol and lifted it out of Cade Rennick's hand, and Cade Rennick let him. He opened his fingers and let him. Ellis Vane dropped the magazine into his own palm, cleared the chamber, put the round in his shirt pocket, and set the pistol down on the gravel about 10 feet away. And then he turned around, and he got down on his one good knee in front of a 12-year-old boy, and he took the vest out of his hands and folded it over his broken forearm, and he put his other hand on the back of that boy's head, and he did not say a single word. It was 8:06 in the morning. It was over. Truly over this time. Sheriff Warren Tibbs came up that county road at 8:11 in a personal vehicle, in a golf shirt, out of uniform, on purpose. And he got out and walked into that yard alone with his hands empty, because he had 400 motorcycles behind him, and he had spent 34 years learning what a uniform does to a moment like that one. He walked past Cade Rennick, who was sitting on his own truck bumper by then with his hands on his knees, and he went to the man sitting in the gravel with a boy standing next to him, and he crouched down,
and he said the first name that almost nobody in that county had used in 15 years. He said, "Ellis, can you hear me all right?" They found the 11 gallons in 2 cans in the bed of the third truck. They found the 2 road flares. They found the bolt cutters. They found the high-vis vest and the magnetic county maintenance placard, and they found in the glove box of a white flatbed with 1 yellow door, exactly where a 12-year-old had said it would be 12 hours earlier, on a piece of paper pushed under a locked door, a dark red shop rag with a club patch sewn onto it with heavy thread. They left the way people leave a funeral. Quiet, careful, nobody looking back. 411 bikes rolled out of that county road at 9:15 and went to the fairground and parked in the gravel lot in rows, engines off, kickstands down, exactly the way Denny Cobb had told them to. And at 10:30 in the morning, 90 minutes late, 311 children ate pancakes under a 120-foot timber pavilion at the Ransom Creek Fairground, while 40 women from 2 churches ran the griddles, and a Kentucky Fire Department pumper sat parked at the north end with its lights going, for no reason at all, except that Amos Hurd thought the kids would like it. They put $9,400 in that bucket that day, which is the most the Red Bud Run has ever taken in a single morning. And it is not close. Ellis Vane was not there. He was in the emergency room in Belmont with a broken left ulna, 11 staples in the back of his head, a right knee that needed a second operation in October, and 2 cracked ribs he did not mention to anybody for a week. He sat in a plastic chair in the hallway for 2 hours before they got to him with a bag of ice from the vending area held on the back of his head, and when a nurse asked him what happened, he said, "I fell." And the boy sat in the chair next to him the entire time and would not move. And at 11:40, they finally let him go in. Now the part where the machinery does its work. Deputies executed a warrant on that yard by 2 o'clock that afternoon and took 11 gallons of mixed fuel, 2 flares, a set of bolt cutters, a stolen county placard, a patch rag, a 9mm, and 4 cell phones. And inside those phones was a group message thread going back 4 months in which 14 men had discussed, in writing, in text, with times and quantities and a diagram, the burning of an occupied structure. And inside a shoebox in the back room of Fenn's Drug were 3 years of invoices that said monthly site service. And inside a locked substation on Main Street was a piece of notebook paper written by a 12-year-old at 8:40 on a Saturday night that laid the whole thing out before any of it happened. And Harlan Boyce sat down with 2 investigators on Monday morning at 9:05, without a lawyer and without a deal, and talked for 4 hours and 11 minutes, and gave them every single thing he had. Ridgeline Salvage and Hauling was out of business in 26 days. Cade Rennick was convicted at trial the following March on conspiracy to commit aggravated arson, attempted aggravated arson, aggravated assault, extortion, and a weapons count. And he got 14 years and will serve 11 of them. Marvin Tully got 6. Dale Prather got 7. The Lemons brothers got 4 apiece. Keegan Shell and Ronnie Witt cooperated and got 2 years each, and Keegan Shell, who was 24 and had been in that lot with a burning notebook, stood up at his own sentencing and said out loud in open court that he thought about that boy's hands every day. Harlan Boyce was charged, pled, testified, and served 11 months. And on the stand, describing the moment a man with a chain backed away from an old man who stood back up, he stopped talking for so long that the judge asked him twice if he needed a recess, and he said, "No, sir. I have needed to say this for a while."
Commissioner Lyle Barrow, who had never been physically present at one single thing that happened, resigned in September after the rezoning file came out in Discovery, and the Fairground Board voted the aggregate lease down a third time, 18-0, counting all 3 votes. And the following June, at the 24th annual Red Bud Run, Lyle Barrow stood behind a griddle in a gray suit with his sleeves rolled up and served pancakes to 300 children for 4 hours in front of the entire county, which nobody made him do, and which he has done every year since.
He told a reporter once that he had spent his whole life on the wrong side of the difference between a number and a person. That is the only quote of his anybody remembers. Sheriff Warren Tibbs retired 2 years later. At his last county commission meeting, he read the boy's note into the record, all of it, including the apology at the bottom, and then he said, "I had this in my hand at 9:40 on a Sunday morning, and it had been under my own door since Saturday night. And I want that in the minutes." He is a private citizen now, and he goes to the run every year and stands at the back. And this is the part you came for. What that boy got. The first thing he got was on the following Tuesday, and it came from 411 people who had never met him. Denny Cobb had passed a helmet at the fairground on Sunday after they knew, and he had told everybody exactly what it was for. And men gave the way men give when they have just found out what almost happened to 300 children. They put $19,040 in that helmet in about 11 minutes. They put it in an account for his education, with Wanda Pruitt and a lawyer from Belmont as trustees, because a 12-year-old cannot hold $19,000. And they added to it every June after that. And 11 years later, it paid for a 2-year diesel technology degree and the first year of a shop of his own. The second thing was smaller, and it mattered more that week. They got him a bicycle. Not a nice one from a catalog either. Curtis Eyre, 69, out of Bristol, spent 3 days building one out of a good used frame with a new wheel set built by hand, and he brought it down on a trailer on Thursday, and on the top tube, under the clear coat, in a shop that does motorcycle tanks, he had somebody letter 2 words, very small. It said, 9 miles. The third thing was in October, at the club's fall gathering, which is a thing that mostly involves a field and a lot of folding chairs. They did not make that boy a member of anything. He was 12, and every one of those men understood exactly where that line is. What they did was give him a cut-down leather vest, black, that fit a boy, with nothing on the back of it at all, except one small patch about 3 inches across that Charlotte Beam's sister stitched by hand. And the patch was a bicycle. Just a bicycle. And on the inside, on the lining, over the left side, hand-lettered in white paint pen, it said, Ransom Creek. And under that, 7:11 a.m. And the fourth thing was not given to him by anybody, and it took years. And it is the only one that actually mattered. He started talking again. Not that day, and not that year. It came back the way water comes back into a dry line, in spits, with a lot of air in it. And for the first 11 months, it was one word at a time, and only ever to 2 people, an old man in a tire shop and a 76-year-old woman who worked nights at a poultry plant. There was a speech therapist in Knoxville the club paid for, 41 sessions, and she was good. And she has said since that she did almost nothing, that the boy had already done the hard part, in a gravel yard on a Sunday morning, and everything after that was just practice. By 15, he could order his own food. By 17, he could talk to a customer. He still does not say much. He is not a talker, and he never will be. And if you go in that shop today and ask him a question, You are going to get an answer about 11 words long, and then you are going to get a cup of coffee, whether you wanted one or not. Micah Teague finished school in Ransom Creek, and every day after school for 6 years, he was at the feed and tire, and Ellis Vane taught him everything, slowly, badly, without ever once explaining why he was teaching it. The knee never came all the way back.
Vane used a cane from that October on, a plain hickory one, and he still opened that bay door at 6 o'clock in the morning. And after about 2029, it was the boy who lifted it, and the old man who came in at 6:05 with the coffee. They did not talk about that Sunday, not really. Micah asked him once, when he was about 15, sitting on an upturned bucket, why he never told anybody who he had been. And Ellis Vane thought about it for a while and said, "Because who I was is not something a man ought to be able to spend twice." And that was the entire conversation, and Micah Teague has repeated that sentence to about 4 people in his life. The vest went back in the box. That is the ending, if you want the true one, and it happened on the Tuesday after, in the shop, with 2 people in the room. Ellis Vane sat on the stool behind the counter, with his arm in a cast, and he unfolded that thing on the counter one time and looked at it. And then he folded it back the way it had been folded for 27 years, in eighths. And he laid it in the steel box with both hands, and he closed the lid, and he pressed both clasps down with his thumb. And then he got down on the floor, with a bad knee and a broken arm, and bolted that box back to the underside of the shelf, and it stayed there. He put his hand on it every morning at 6 for 11 more years, and he never opened it again. Nobody in that county ever asked him about it either. The town mostly let it lie. There were 4 or 5 different versions of what happened at that yard going around Dolly's diner within a month, and one of them had him putting 6 men in the hospital, and another had 30 men from 3 states arriving at once, and Ellis Vane never corrected a single one of them. He would just say, "It was not like that," and go put a pot of coffee on. The letter came 11 years later, in 2037, from a facility in Morgan County, and it was 3 pages long in pencil. It was from Cade Rennick, 40 years old, and it did not ask for anything. It did not ask for forgiveness, and it did not ask for a visit, and it did not ask for a word to a parole board, and it did not try to make itself smaller. It said, "I have had 11 years to think about what I would have done at 9:20 that morning if a kid had not gotten on a bicycle, and I do not think I understood until about year 6 what it was I was actually going to do." It said, "I told myself the whole time it was about my father and the courthouse, and that is true. And it is also not a reason. It is just a story I used." And at the end it said, "I am not writing to you. I am writing to the boy. And I am asking you to decide whether he ever ought to see this. And if you decide no, then that is the right answer, and I will not send another one." Ellis Vane held that letter for 4 days. Then he gave it to a 23-year-old man who read it standing up behind the counter of a tire shop, and put it down and went out into the bay and stood there for a while. And then he came back in and said 3 words, "Keep it somewhere." And it is in a drawer in that shop today, and neither of them has ever written back, and both of them have decided that not writing back is not the same thing as hate. Ellis Vane died on a Wednesday morning in November of 2037, at 79 years old, at home on Cutter Hollow Road, in a chair, with the television off. The coroner said his heart, and that is all anybody knows, and all anybody needs to. Micah Teague found him at 6:10 in the morning when he did not come in,
because the man had not been 10 minutes late to anything in 27 years, and then 11 more. They buried him next to Ruth and Danny on that hill outside Sevierville. About half that county drove up for it. There were 190 motorcycles in that cemetery road, which had to be seen to be believed, and Roy Sackett, 83 by then and in a wheelchair, was pushed up to the graveside by a man of 23, and he sat there and did not say anything at all. And Padre Sackett was a man who always said something. The shop is still open. It says Ransom Creek Feed and Tire on the front, and it opens at 6 o'clock in the morning. And the reason it opens at 6 is not sentiment. It is that this is simply how that place runs. And the man who runs it now would tell you that if you asked, and would not understand why you were asking. There is a stool behind that counter at the far end that nobody sits on. It is not roped off, and there is no sign on it. And if you sat on it, nobody would say a word to you. They would just look at you, and you would get up. And on the wall, low, at about the height of a man's chest, there is a photograph in a black frame with a crack in the glass of 17 men in front of a line of motorcycles in 1979, and nobody ever asks about it. And bolted under the shelf where the receipt spike is, there is an army green steel ammunition box that a man checked every morning for 38 years and needed exactly once. It sits there, year after year, untouched, the way a fire extinguisher sits behind glass. Not forgotten, just no longer needed. Every year on the last Sunday in June, 400 and some motorcycles roll out of the Belmont truck stop at 7:51 in the morning. And every year, 40 minutes before that, at 7:11, everything in that lot goes quiet for 60 seconds. They shut them off. 400 engines off at once, in the dark end of a summer morning. And nobody says anything, and nobody explains it to the new people. They just let them figure it out. The bikes have gotten newer, and the men have gotten older, and Denny Cobb handed the road captain's clipboard off in 2032. And every June there are 11 or 12 people at that registration table who have no idea why the lot goes silent at 7-11. Somebody always tells them. The way they tell it is not accurate anymore. It has gotten bigger than it was. And in 2039, they finally put a name on it, on the flyers and everything. And the man they named it after fought them about it for 2 years and lost. It is not called the Red Bud Run anymore. On the yellow paper taped in the front window of a tire shop on the east end of Ransom Creek, it says, the 9-mile run. And under that, in smaller letters, it says, for the pediatric burn unit. And under that, since 2004. Now, think back for a minute to where this whole thing started. A gas station lot. A kid on the concrete. $1.10 worth of paper burning on the hood of somebody else's car, while 11 adults watched, and 3 men laughing, and a boy with no way on this earth to tell anybody what had just been taken from him. It looked, in that first moment, like the oldest arrangement there is, the strong taking from the weak because they could, in public, in front of people, with nothing at all standing in the way of it. It looked like the world doing the thing the world does far too often, which is to find the one person in the lot who cannot answer, and go after that one. But here is the thing about quiet people. The quiet is not the weakness. Sometimes the quiet is a choice made on purpose by somebody who has already been all the way down every road that violence goes down, and came back from it and swore they would not go again.
And sometimes the quiet is not a choice at all. It is a door that shut when a person was 7 years old, and behind that door, there is a whole human being who has been paying attention the entire time, and who has been writing everything down in a notebook that costs $1.10, and who will get on a bicycle in the dark and go 9 miles with a burned hand and a bent wheel. because there is nobody else, and it has to be somebody. Cade Rennick looked at a green work shirt and saw an old man in a tire shop. He looked at a 12-year-old with a pencil and saw nothing at all. And that second one is the mistake that cost him 11 years of his life. Because it was never the old man that beat him. It was the kid he did not bother to count. What he should have seen in Ellis Vane was a man who had set down something extremely heavy a long time ago, on purpose, in a cemetery, out loud, one word at a time, and who was going to pick it back up exactly once, for exactly the reason he had written the door in for, and then set it down again for good. And what he should have seen in Micah Teague is what almost nobody sees in a person who does not speak. Not an absence, a held breath. If there is a child in your life who has stopped talking, or who never really started, I want to say one plain thing about that, and then I will let you go. It is not defiance, and it is not slowness, and it is not something they are doing at you, and pushing harder on it has never once worked in the history of the world. Talk to a doctor about it, and ask for someone who works with children specifically, because there are people who do nothing else, and they are good at it. And in the meantime, hand them a notebook and a pencil, and read what is in it like it is worth reading. You do not have to fix anybody. You just have to make the call. The part of this I keep coming back to is not the salvage yard. Honestly, the salvage yard is the least interesting thing in the whole story. What I keep coming back to is mile 3. Somewhere out on that road, in the fog, with a bad hand and 11 pounds of steel on his back and 6 more miles to go, that boy had a completely free and private opportunity to turn around, and nobody would ever have known. And he did not take it. So that is what I want to ask you. At mile 3, in the dark, with nobody watching, what do you think was going through that kid's head? What kept him on those pedals? Put it in the comments, because I read every single one of them, and the ones on these particular stories, I read twice. And if this is your first time here, welcome. This is a channel about ordinary people, mostly older, mostly overlooked, who turn out to be exactly the right person standing in exactly the wrong place at exactly the right moment. If that is your kind of story, stay with us. There is no rush, and there is nothing to sign. Just stay. There are 2 more waiting for you on the screen right now, and one of them is about a man who kept a promise for 31 years to somebody who never found out. Thank you for giving this one your whole attention all the way to the end. That is not a small thing anymore, and I know it. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by general themes of loyalty, courage, and quiet decency. All persons, organizations, and events depicted are entirely fictitious, and any resemblance to real people, living or dead, or to actual organizations or events, is purely coincidental. It is intended for entertainment purposes only.